Good morning, welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, today we are having discussion on English literature. The precise topic is reading English literature. You all know English literature is a rich and vast body of knowledge. We try to understand it, but sometimes we fail. Majority of our students, Indian students, they are going for the degree on English literature, but sometimes what happens, they do understand very well the journalistic writing, writing in English, but when they try to understand the literature world, they fail. Why it is so? It is because of the knowledge, everything because of something else, or because of the guidance which they don't get the proper guidance. We'll try to understand the different aspect of it, and for discussion on this very topic, we have in studio the eminent person, Dr. Bhim Singh Dahiya. He is an author, academician, educationist, and he has done PhD from Cincinnati University, USA, and PhD from there, and he holds several other laurels like writing books, so many books, but two books are very short. That is a history of English literature, and the other is University Autonomy in India. And there are about dozen more books. We don't need to explain all this here. And Dr. Bhim Singh Dahiya is a very engaged in very different platform from the and helping the students, and also talking about how to improve the English literature study in India. So he has been professor for 40 years in India and abroad also. So his knowledge and wide experience will help us today to understand how to study the English literature. So, but before we start, we would like to know the historical perspective of English literature, so that we can understand the history of English literature and how the English literature is different from the British literature. So with this, we request Dr. Dahiya for the EduSet lecture, and we want to know how the English literature is different from the British literature, sir.
Well, to understand any literature, first we must know the language in which it is written. Obviously, English, call it British literature, it is written in the English language. So we must know the language first, and proficiency in language is very important, which comes through proper schooling. Unfortunately, of late there has been reduced emphasis on grammar teaching. As a result, our students in schools know very inadequate grammar, and hence they are not able to manage proper English writing. Plus, literary language, it may be English or any other language, has to be different from ordinary language, because every discipline has its own register. Legal English will be of one kind, historical language of another kind, then sociology, philosophy, psychology, and so on. Every discipline has its own vocabulary, has its own, thought pattern and structure, and therefore you have to be conversant with all that to know that subject. If you want to understand literature, you must know that literary language is different from ordinary language. Ordinary language, like the newspaper language or any other common writing, newspaper or journalistic or magazine, whatever, or common speech, everyday speech, people are not very particular about the correctness of English, which a great writer would be. Great writer automatically would be writing proper English. Besides, in literature, language has to be emotive. which is not the case with legal or historical or psychological language. They are scientific, you see, descriptions of things. Here it is description of life, because literature is nothing but a reflection of life. Literature is about life, and as life is many colored, many faceted, and similarly in literature you find stories of joy, stories of sorrow, you find tragedies, you find comedies, you find romances, you find love stories, you find death stories. So all kinds, whatever is there in life is there in literature also. Therefore, you cannot follow literature unless you keep it in mind that you are reading about life.
Okay.
And therefore, about life also, the personal, the emotive, the internal life, not the external. A historian will deal with the events that take place in life outside, but a literary person will be dealing with your private life, your personal life. How do you deal with other people, including your own wife, your own children, your neighbors, your countrymen and other people.
Okay.
Therefore, literature has to be viewed from that angle, the angle of life. Now, any literature does not come out of nothing. Nothing comes out of nothing. It has to come out of something. Charles Darwin had given us very good tips about how to have knowledge about anything. It may be species of life, it may be history, it may be environment. 4 things are basic that he says. One is there is struggle for existence. The other is survival of the fittest. So this struggle is not merely in life species, different animals, different humans, different nations, different communities, different castes. There is always a struggle among them, and whoever is more powerful survives. Similarly, in languages also there is always a struggle for existence. In India, for example, we have more than 3,000 communities, and each community has a language of its own. You may call it dialect, but they have it. They communicate with each other. But how many languages do we have properly accepted? 26 officially. And these 26 languages at one time were the dialects of Sanskrit, because languages also develop under the umbrella of power. So wherever the power center is, that language will develop. So there was a time when Sanskrit had an empire, not only in India but spread right up to Thailand, Indonesia and other countries. So all those countries, the languages they have now, Malaysia, they were dialects of Sanskrit. So these 26 languages also were dialects of Sanskrit. But when the empire ended, there came the Muslim invaders, then came the British and so on. So whoever is holding the power strings will impose his own language. So after Sanskrit we had Persian.
Okay. So 2 points that comes to the fore. That one is the angle should be changed, shifted from not the event centric, but it should be the literature of a life. Only then one can understand the true value of the literature, any literature, for any literature. Every it will be emotion, it will be different things which one live with in life, that will be reflected in the any literatures. So one thing this. Second thing we need to know, as you explained in India, in the context of India, that Sanskrit was the dialect of the different regions, and then it also went abroad. The same way the British, as they went also the English literature.
I am coming to that.
Yes. English spread over And so the English literature domain is also, we can say, increased, got widened. The people who either wrote in English or the spoke something in English and that jotted down at one place, that is a domain of the English literature.
Let me come to that.
Okay.
You see, as I said in the very beginning, literature, like any other discipline or even life or species, has its evolution.
Yes.
And English literature also had its evolution,
Right.
and it started roughly. We begin with Chaucer, which is 14th century,
Okay.
because he was born in 1340 and then died in 1400.
Mhm.
So 14th century, he is considered the first great writer of English. But that does not mean the country was not there before or the people were not there. People were there, but they were governed by other nations, other people, and that is why they go back to their heritage. Coming back to Darwin, Darwin had also said two factors are important for the study of evolution. One is heredity, the other is environment.
Okay.
So the heredity of English literature is Greco-Roman. So that goes back to 1000 year BC. Homer is the earliest writer known in Greek. So those ancient times, Greeks were ruling the entire Europe, and not only Europe, Asia also. You know, Alexander came right up to India. He returned from the Ganges.
Okay.
And after the Greeks, the Romans came. So Romans had their empire right up to 450 AD. 450 AD. So at that time, Latin was the language of entire Europe, because they were the rulers, and English was not there. English came when the German tribes invaded England in 5th century AD, 450. They defeated the Romans.
Okay.
And the German tribes were Angles, Saxons, and Jutes or Juts.
Okay.
These three tribes. So from Angles and Saxons became Anglo-Saxon.
Anglo-Saxon.
And from Angles became England.
Okay.
And from Angles became English. So actually it was the dialect of the German tribe
Okay.
which actually became English in the 5th, 6th century AD. And it continued until 1066 when the Normans invaded England. Normans were French speaking. So then the French became the official language of England. Earlier than that, Anglo-Saxon, which we call Old English, and this Anglo-Norman we call Middle English.
Right.
So this continued until 14th century, and in the 14th century the nation called England emerged, and the language called English emerged.
Our Renaissance period, which we talked about.
No, Renaissance will come in the 15th, 16th century. 15th it started in Italy. In England actually it comes in the 16th century,
Okay.
Renaissance. But before that you have late medieval, and Chaucer was a late medieval poet, and he the language that he used was the Middle English. So proper English developed even after that, which is during the Renaissance, as you say.
Okay.
So that is how the history goes. So whenever they write about English history or English literature, they always go back to the Greco-Roman period.
So it suggests that a student of English literature, those who strive to learn the English literature, read English literature, they should have a knowledge of civilizational history, how they
Yes.
have grown up.
Yes. Just as if we want to know about Indian literature,
Yeah.
we have to know Indian history, and we have to go back to the ancient times,
Right.
Vedic period, and then how the Muslims came, how the British came, and how it expanded. Now, should I go back to English?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, after Chaucer, then the real history of English literature begins. Then comes the Renaissance. Renaissance in England comes in 16th century. In Italy, it had started in the 15th century. In fact, precisely speaking, 1453, Constantinople,
Yeah.
now in Turkey. Earlier its name was Byzantium. The ancient name was Byzantium. It has a civilization of its own. So when Constantinople fell to the Turks, then the Greek scholars, you see, they ran away with whatever texts they could carry and went into Italy.
Right.
So Plato, Aristotle, Homer, Sophocles, other writers. So Greco-Roman ancient writers, whatever they could save, they carried there. And the revival of that literature and philosophy, that brought about what we call Renaissance. And unfortunately, all could not be saved, because all the invaders, whoever it may be the Turks, it may be others, they always burn libraries and cultural centers, so that your past is eradicated. To give you one example, Sophocles, who was the first great, one of the great Greek dramatists. Greek drama came up in the 5th century BC in Athens, and he wrote over 200 plays during those times when there was no pen or paper, and there used to be competition every year, and each playwright will present 3 plays, and 30,000 people will be sitting watching the play, and then they will declare which one was the best. So he had written more than 200 plays, but now what we have as extant, survival, is only 7 plays. So thanks to that invasion of Constantinople, burning everything.
Yeah.
So whatever they could save, they ran away, and that's how Renaissance started. Otherwise, during the medieval time, Church of Rome ruled Europe. All the kings of Europe were subjected to the authority of Church of Rome. So religious diktat was the final. But when this knowledge came, then the republican ideas came, because even in the 5th century BC, Athens had the best republic democracy. Pericles was the king at that time.
Right.
And similarly, the Romans had their republic in the same 5th century BC. So these republican ideas, Plato wrote the book Republic. So from there the ideas of democracy came. New ideas of human dignity, human equality came, and this literature came. And that's how modern period in world history began, with the Renaissance. Yeah.
So Renaissance, the period when all this kind of happened, and that laid the foundation of English literature, and then the different writers, different authors came forward, and what we have the history of English literature, that basically start from there, and students are reading the books, or in the course book are those books which have been written after the Renaissance period.
Yes.
So first, after having this background knowledge of the civilizational evolution or the evolution of English literature that is mentioned somewhere in any course book, so they should, what the third focus should be, because the two things we learn. One, change the focus, change the angle of light. Second, you should learn the evolution evolution of civilization, or how the civilization has functioned across the regions, because one area invader came to another, they destroy and all this. So history of civilization, that good word, I think.
Yeah, you see, one way and the only way literature should be read and understood is to relate it to the history of the people.
Yeah, and otherwise, the words literature is also uh, said that it's expression of culture, values, taste, attitude.
Yeah, because it
Yeah.
reflects life of the people
Yeah.
of its time. You see, Aristotle in the 4th century BC had written a book called Poetics, which we teach to honors MA students, explaining what is poetry, what is epic, what is lyrical poetry, so on and so forth. He had also said one great thing about literature. He said literature combines history and philosophy. Because his teacher Plato, he had said that there is an ancient quarrel between philosophy and literature. Because philosophy is after truth, whereas poetry is after emotions. It make people sentimental. It make people irresponsible, not good citizens. Aristotle said no. It makes them responsible. It makes them more human. It makes them more balanced. And literature and philosophy are not enemies to each other. Literature combines both philosophy and history. He says that philosophy deals with general truths. What is life? What is body? What is soul? What is good? What is evil? And history deals with particular truths. What did Akbar do? What did Ashoka do? So histories of particular people. He says literature combines both. It gives you histories of individual people, but in a manner that it becomes universal.
Right.
Why do we read Homer now 3000 years after, or Shakespeare after 400 years, or Kalidas now after 2000 years? Because what they have written about is true even today.
Okay.
Because they have written about human life, how we behave with our wives, with our children, with family, with nation, so on and so forth.
Okay. So before we discuss in detail the how to read any novel, any literary work, we would like to know, illustrate something about the different ages of English literature, the different period, which and what are the major characteristic of the period.
Yeah. Roughly speaking, beginning with the Renaissance, because before Renaissance, as I told you, Old English and Middle English literature, which is not of consequence today. So we begin with the Renaissance.
Right.
During the Renaissance, drama was the dominant form of literature. In every age, some form dominates.
Yeah.
People were fond of watching, a theatre. At any given time in the 16th century, when Shakespeare was writing, 1/10 of London population would be in the theatres. As many as 15,000 people will be sitting in the Globe. Globe was the name of the theatre where Shakespeare staged his plays.
Okay.
And there were 300 playwrights writing, dramatists at that time.
Okay.
And there were 100 theatre companies staging the plays in London. But unfortunately, the mayor of London would not permit the theatres within the municipal limits,
Okay.
because they were Puritans and they said, theatre is immoral. Just like today, our Arya Samajis, others will say films are immoral.
Right.
So they will not like children to see
So
them.
the conflict has always been in
Always
history.
been there.
Yeah.
That's why Plato had said, banish the poets from the ideal republic.
Right.
They will have no place there. Similarly, in the 16th century, Shakespeare, when Queen Elizabeth was the ruler, although she was fond of watching them, so theatres were outside the London municipal
Cities,
limits.
yeah.
River Thames. Today Thames is right through the center of the city. At that time this was the boundary. And Globe was on the west bank of the theatre outside the limit.
Right.
And there outside all the dirt of the city, all the noise making industry, everything was there. And in those conditions, Shakespeare and other actors and writers were living.
Okay.
But then theatre was very popular. So drama, Marlowe came before Shakespeare. So he was the great dramatist of the time. You know, he wrote Tambour Lane, he wrote The Jew of Malta, he wrote Dr. Faustus,
Yeah.
these famous plays. Then came Shakespeare. He became even more popular because he died in a brawl, Marlowe, in a pub at the age of 29. Shakespeare lived at up to the age of 52. So he could produce 37 plays, now 39, and narrative poems, 150 sonnets. So did so much. So he became the most famous and most popular playwright of the time. Thereafter came Ben Jonson and Chapman. See, they brought in a different kind of drama. But Shakespearean drama is basically romantic. And Renaissance period is romantic essentially. Means your life as well as literature are not governed by rules. You have freedom of emotion, freedom of thought. That is why Dr. Faustus is inquiring about God and he wants to be as powerful as God. Hamlet is inquiring about everything in life, what is good or what is evil, including God again challenging. So this was the period when there was total liberation of thought and emotion. And girls were coming up, women education was coming up. Shakespeare's own daughter, you see earlier girls used to be married off at the age of 15 or below,
Right.
12, 8 years. You see, one of the queens, she was only 8 years when she was married. But then Shakespeare's own daughter, one married at the age of 24 and the other at the age of 31, and both by choice. So things were changing. That is why Renaissance is the first modern period. Then of course it produced some great poets also like Edmund Spenser. Then prose writer Thomas More. Thomas More, you know, wrote Utopia, Ideal Republic again, just like Plato. And then Philip Sidney, he wrote Arcadia, you see, a sort of pastoral fiction. And Shakespeare wrote pastoral comedies. Then he wrote romances. So these were the writers of the time, followed by Bacon, Francis Bacon. He was the first essay writer in English. Before him in French, of course, there was Montaigne. So Montaigne was the model for Francis Bacon. So Bacon wrote essays in English. And this group of writers constitutes the leading writers of the Elizabethan age, because Queen Elizabeth governed or ruled England from 1588 to 1603, and that is considered the golden period of English history, both in history as well as literature. And that is where the British Empire also begins. You remember America was discovered at that time, 1492. But then the British reached there in the 16th century, Queen Elizabeth's period. And Virginia was the first state in America where they reached, and it was named by them. Why Virginia? Because they had the Virgin Queen. So they gave it the name Virginia, which is still the largest. You remember Virginia tobacco? And that is where the quarrel began between the people living in America and England. And in that quarrel, they lost America. America became independent in 1776, tobacco trouble.
Okay.
So these period which is three or
Only
four,
one period I have talked of, Renaissance.
yeah, Renaissance.
Then quickly I can talk of others if you
Yeah.
like. Yeah.
So I will talk about others, but before that we want to know there was any difference in literary style also, yeah, because of the happening what was happening that times. They capture on that basis we divided this period. Yeah, is this because of the literary style?
Yeah, you see, every age will have its own style of literature. And Elizabethan style, where they say English language as well as literature, you see, touched the peak. The style was exploratory.
Okay.
They, see, were not unmindful of the rules Aristotle or later Horace had given how to write a poem, how to write a novel, how to write a short poem or a long poem, epic, so on, how to write a play.
Yeah.
So they knew the rule, but at the same time, they were not slave to the rule.
Allowed them to take its own shape.
Shakespeare, you see, took liberties with the rules, both of language as well as literature. And unless you take liberty, unless you become exploratory, that's why they went all around the world. So exploration was not physical alone. Exploration was linguistic, exploration was literary, exploration was philosophic.
And exploration in treatment of the character.
Character, yes. So you remember it was during that very period America was discovered, Canada was discovered, Australia was discovered. So half the world by a handful of people.
Okay.
England is smaller than even Punjab,
Right.
but then half the world they discovered and occupied. And that's why today English is the dominant language, because more people speak English. Because they imposed their language in Australia, in America, in Canada, wherever they went,
Right.
in India, in Africa. So most people are speaking English today.
Okay. What followed next? Next period.
Well, next period is called Neoclassical, because 1660 is considered the end of the Renaissance,
Yeah.
where Milton is the last writer, John Milton,
Yeah.
who wrote the famous Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained.
Yeah.
Christian, Bible-based, you say, long poems, epics. But thereafter came a set of writers beginning with Ben Jonson and Chapman in drama, and Dryden in poetry, followed by Pope, followed by Samuel Johnson, and in prose, Swift. So these were the writers, and Addison and Steele, you remember, they wrote essay. So the real English essay begin with those writers. These people thought that Renaissance writers were taking too much liberty with the rules
Okay.
and with life, with morality also. Therefore, rules must be imposed both in life as well as literature. So they became rule bound,
Okay.
and they brought back Aristotle and Horace. So Pope and Dryden, they swear by Horace. So whatever Horace said, they only translated into English. Read Pope's essay on man or essay on criticism. Both are nothing but translation of Horace's poems and rules. Do this and do not do that. For example, he says, keep murder off stage. So in Shakespeare you find no murder takes place on the stage itself.
Right.
Of course, only in the last scene. Last scene, lot of murders take place there. Even in Hamlet, so many deaths. But before that, Hamlet's father, it is only reported. Then Hamlet kills Polonius, only reported. He kills his two friends, only reported. Only in the last scene, to make an impact of the ending, there are murders. But Horace had said, keep murders off stage.
Right.
So these people were sticklers to rules and they said rules must be followed.
Yeah, that's why this period is called restoration of the restoration.
No, restoration because, yeah, restoration in that sense, but actually restoration is related to the restoration of monarchy.
Okay.
Because there was a period, short period though, when the Puritans came to rule the country. They killed Charles the First in 1629. First they imprisoned him in 1629, then they beheaded him, killed him in 1642. Then from 1642 to 1660, there was this Parliament of England ruling the country. And Parliament was headed by, dominated
Right.
by the Puritans. And you know Oliver Cromwell, he was the dictator in the Parliament. But then in 1660 came back Charles II, who was being brought up as a child in France. Because when they killed his father, Charles I, his mother with the child ran away to France because she belonged there. So he grew up there, and with the French army support, they returned in 1660. So return of the monarchy is called restoration. But also restoration of the rules, you say. So neoclassical period continued until 1789. When
89 or 98?
Well, 98, no, it has been revised to 1789
Okay.
for two reasons. One, French Revolution,
Okay.
1789. Second, William Blake, who was the first romantic poet in England, his songs of innocence and songs of experience, they were published in 1789.
Okay.
1798 was a sort of manifesto of romanticism, lyrical ballads by Wordsworth and Coleridge together. And Wordsworth wrote preface to lyrical ballads. And that became a sort of manifesto for the romantic literature, romantic period. But now the historians date it to 1789.
Okay.
That is where the real romantic literature begins with William Blake.
So after neoclassical.
Yeah, after new classical then comes the romantic period, which continues from 1798 to 1837. 1837 because Queen Victoria then took over, 1837 to 1901. So those years, 37 to 91, that is called the Victorian period. So in the Romantic period, there was again a revolt against rules and revolt against civilization, so-called, because civilization has been in the West or Europe or America city-based. You remember the Romans or the Greeks, the ruling class were city-based. The senators of Rome, lords,
Right.
and the rest of the public, peasantry or working class, you see, they lived in the rural sector. So civilization was linked up with city life. Whoever was living in the city was civilized, the other were barbaric, barbarous, and that extended to whoever was the ruler. Greeks called the Romans as barbarous, Romans called the British as barbarous, British called us the barbarous. So whoever is the ruler is the civilized one, and the rest are barbaric. So this has been the bias. But then the idea during the neoclassical period, Thomas Hobbes and others who were the philosophers, they thought that the evolution was linear and progressive of human civilization. The earliest people in the ancient period were primitive, and thereafter there has been a continuous evolution in human civilization. Men are becoming better and better. civic life is becoming better and better. Romantics said no, it may be the opposite. He says the primitive people were the best people. They were simple, they were straight, they were honest, and there was no gap between the inside and the outside. Whatever was inside was outside. That's why you remember Hamlet, when his mother says, "You seem to be overburdened with your father's death." He says, Madam, seem? What do you mean by seem? Here there is no seeming. I am what I am. What is inside is outside. So that is the basis of Romantic philosophy. And they say, no, the process of civilization is reverse. We in India also believe, remember, golden period, silver period, then iron age, the last, like Kali Yuga. So now we believe we are in Kali Yuga. So that is the Romantic thought, which actually what we call Romanticism in the West is based upon the Indian thought. You see, you remember after 16th century, there was greater interaction between East and West. Aristotle came with Alexander, right up to Ganges. And the first thing he said was, I want to talk to the philosophers. So Chanakya and others, they were there, and they had interaction. So Indian thought had traveled to the West, and the Romantic thought is essentially Indian thought, which first came to Germany. German scholars. They in fact translated all our Vedic literature from Sanskrit into English. Then came the British Orientalists during the era of Hastings, 18th century, and he said translate all their literature. There is a lot of wisdom there. So this wisdom reached
Warren Hastings directly.
Hastings. So he brought a lot of scholars from Oxford, Cambridge, and they translated. They were called British Orientalists. They knew Sanskrit. So from Sanskrit they translated all our Vedic literature, including literature also Kalidas and other writers, into English. And that's how the thought reached. In England, Coleridge brought from Germany that thought. He wrote a book called Aids to Reflection, to Philosophy. And that reached then America also. So American transcendentalists, British Romantics, German Romantics, they were, even the German philosophy, idealism. There is always a philosophy behind literature. Just like neoclassical, there were empirical philosophy. Similarly, behind Romantic literature, there was the idealistic philosophy, Kant and Hegel, then Schlegel brothers. So Coleridge went there and stayed in Germany and brought all this knowledge, which was essentially Indian. And that became the Romantic knowledge. So Romantics thought, no, civilization is actually moving in the reverse direction. Earlier people were better, superior people. And now the so-called civilization is only making them smarter, more cunning, and there is devaluation of moral values. So that is how literature, and you remember the slogan Wordsworth raised was, go back to nature. Leave civilization. So Coleridge, Southey, Wordsworth, his sister, all went to the countryside, set up a cottage there, and lived all their life there. They didn't live in London. So they were the idealists. And it is their literature based upon the simplicity of rural life, promoting that rural life as an ideal, and rural life as a repository of human moral values.
So, but critics say it could be an escapist approach.
Yeah, that was said by the Modernists, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound. They were city bred. You see, there has always been a sort of action and reaction between the country and the city. You remember the pre-Romantics, there were like Collins and Burns, Gray, Thomas Gray. These were the pre-romantics. And one of them, Collins, had said, that God made the country, man made the city. So country is made by God. So those values of God-like moral values are there in the country.
Okay, so what was their reaction on this criticism? During their period, the criticism also came, it was the later criticism.
It was later. It came in the modernist period. Let me quickly come to that.
Yeah.
In between comes the Victorian period. Victorians tried to bring about a compromise between the classical thought and the romantic thought. That's why the famous Victorian compromise. You remember the writers Carlyle, Newman, then Matthew Arnold. These were the leading writers, then Tennyson. And they wrote on that line, striking a compromise between the romantic emotions and urges and some sort of intellectual, mental, civilizational discipline. After all, you can't have life without a structure.
Right.
Life has to be structured. So they tried to strike a compromise between the two. So the Victorian literature is essentially romantic, but with the difference that they don't believe in total letting loose your emotions. There has to be some structuring of your emotions and some value system to govern. So that is why in the later 19th century, later Victorian age, came the movements of realism and naturalism. As against romanticism came realism and naturalism. That you can't run away from life. You can't go back to nature, to primitive times. You have to go forth. Of course, you can try to retain the better values of life, but you can't run away from the city. You have to go forth.
Right.
Life can't go back.
A change there,
Yes,
change there.
change there, whatever changes you make. But then after the Victorians came, after First World War, came the modernists. Modernists were led primarily by T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. These were the leading theoreticians of modernism. You see, their basic premise was First World War. They said the liberal humanism on which romanticism was based or Victorianism was based has failed. He said, where is your humanism? People were butchered into millions and so on.
Yeah.
So man remains what it is and so on. So they brought these ideas and called the romantics as sentimental, immature. That's why Shelley, Byron, immature.
Right.
They were dismissed. And Wordsworth as sentimental, Keats as sentimental, Arnold as sentimental. And therefore, the slogan was, during the modernist period, two slogans which Ezra Pound gave. He said, make poetry difficult
Okay.
and make poetry new. No following of the tradition of romanticism or Victorianism. Forget about it. That was bad tradition. Therefore, make it new. That's why you have a poem like The Wasteland. You can't really make out
Right.
much. It is technical innovation. So he made it altogether new. No, you see, overflow of powerful feelings.
Right.
Like Wordsworth's spontaneous overflow or emotion recollected in tranquility. You have emotion suppressed
Yeah.
because Eliot said the man who suffers and the writer who creates are two different persons. So don't talk of emotion, talk of the man, writer, writing. So make it difficult, make it new. So they went into innovations of technique. So they were more craftsmen. So better craftsmen rather than, you see, better human caring for emotions or values and so on. So city smartness they have. That's why they are relying in modernism upon irony, paradox, ambiguity, invective, satire, so on and so forth. Now these
Different
are
forms of writing come up.
yeah, but these are qualities of the city smart set.
Yeah.
Because how do you define irony? Irony is to say one thing and mean another, which means you are not being honest
Not
in
being
what you are saying. But they say this smartness. These are simple fools who say what they feel.
Right.
They are revealing themselves. So why do you reveal yourself? You are a simpleton.
Yes.
So that is the difference between the city and the town. So there has always been in action and reaction. Renaissance, romantic. Neoclassical, reaction to romanticism. Romanticism, reaction to neoclassicism. Victorianism, reaction to romanticism. Modernism, reaction to Victorianism. So action and reaction goes on and evolution goes on.
Which is called in sociology thesis, synthesis,
Antithesis. Yeah, Hegel.
Yeah.
Hegel gave that. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Hegel's philosophy. But Marx made fun of it.
Okay.
Marx, because Hegel had also said history repeats itself. Marx said, yes, it does, but whatever once was tragedy becomes a farce. So he's comparing Napoleon the First and Napoleon the Third. He says Napoleon the First was a hero and third is a joker.
Right.
So that is how history, he says, is repeating.
Yeah.
You have a Napoleon, but very different kind of Napoleon.
Okay. So yeah, having discussed these things, today we have not much time, so we'll talk because you talked about the all these things, different period characteristic and all this. We find in the writing of William Shakespeare the three things: tragedy, comedies,
Histories, romances.
romances.
4 types.
Yeah, 4 times. So how he could manage? It was the demand of the time.
Well, yes. As I said in the very beginning, you cannot read literature detached from life. And the life conditions at that time, one I mentioned that theatres were not allowed within the city limits. Highly moralistic. Secondly, there was monarchy. So you could not write about contemporary life because some writers tried, their noses and ears, they were chopped off.
Yes.
They were put behind bars. So Shakespeare went back to history, ancient history.
Okay.
So nobody will take any objection.
Yeah.
So he wrote Roman history plays, wrote, medieval European history, Richard II, Richard III, Henry II, all medieval kings, but only when Queen Elizabeth was no more, after 1603, then he wrote Henry VIII,
Okay.
her father. Otherwise, all medieval kings. But even there, it was his smartness that he said all that he wanted to say and without annoying
Anyway.
the rulers. How did he do it? He will introduce characters who are jesters, fools, who are not taken seriously, or a madman. Even King Lear, he says harsh truths when he has gone mad.
Yeah.
Hamlet, when he is being considered a madman. When Lear is mad, he says, even a dog is obeyed in office.
Yeah.
But even when he was king, he wouldn't say that.
Yes.
But now he is pointing out he also behaved like a dog, but then he was obeyed.
Yes. Yes.
When he discarded his third honest daughter, he says, nothing will come out of nothing. I'll give you no dowry and no marriage. So he was behaving irrationally, like a madman. But when he really becomes mad, he is the wisest man. So Shakespeare will manage things in a manner that you will not feel annoyed and he will say what he wants to say. So he gives you critique of society, but through characters who are not taken seriously, court jesters
Yes.
who can make fun of anything and anyone, so nobody takes them seriously. He will make them speak the truth.
Okay, one more thing today I looked, because some of the writers we find they wrote many books, but one writer, I think Anna Karenina, she wrote only one book, Udring Height.
No, Anna
sorry.
Karenina is a book by itself.
Yeah, no,
It's a Russian novel.
Russian. Not the Udring
Wuthering Heights was written by Emily Bronte.
Yeah, she wrote only one.
Only one novel.
book.
They were three sisters.
Okay.
They are called Bronte Sisters. And all the three were writers. In
All three
fact,
were writers.
yeah, all the three, in fact, first brought out a combined volume of poems where all the three contributed. Then there was one sister, she wrote a lot of novels. Jane Eyre, we generally prescribed. Charlotte Bronte.
Okay.
So Charlotte wrote a lot of novels, even Professor. There was a movie made on Professor. But Emily wrote only one.
Yeah.
But that became a classic.
Yeah, that's what.
Whereas
Yeah.
Charlotte wrote 10 novels, they are not classics.
Okay.
But that one novel is a classic.
So today we end up the lecture, but knowing that what is the difference between classical writing and non-classical writing?
Well, there are writings and writing. Every literature or literary writing tells you life story. But then great writers tell the story in a manner that it becomes everlasting. Most writers do not last very long. In Shakespeare's time, as I told you, 300 dramatists were writing for the stage. But how many have survived? Only 2 or 3. Marlowe, Ben Jonson, Shakespeare, we don't read the fourth one. So, in fact, Samuel Johnson, who is considered the greatest Shakespeare critic, he was in the 18th century, he had said, a classic is one which has withstood the test of at least 100 years.
Okay.
Today the tendency, unfortunately, is read the latest, write a PhD thesis on the latest, because you have to read nothing much.
Right.
If you read Shakespeare, there is 400 years of criticism. Folger's library on Shakespeare in Washington, D.C. has over 4 lakh books. So if you want to do research, you will have to study so much. But if Rushdie is writing, you can write anything, because there is no history of criticism. So that is why every student in India writing on contemporary. It is the easiest thing to do. You can say anything.
Right.
So a classic is which has withstood the test of time.
Okay.
We read the ancient literature, medieval literature, and of course modern literature, writers who have withstood the test of time.
Okay. So how will you sum up the today lecture, sir? Today lecture, how will you sum up in a few?
Well, I will say that literature should be the center of our education.
Okay.
In fact, it has always been. Why do we begin education with nursery rhymes? That is literature. That is poetry. Even our religious books are written in poetry. It may be Bible, it may be Quran, it may be Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is a poem.
Right.
So, literature is central. But unfortunately, these days, literature is taught as anything but literature.
Yes.
It is read as politics, it is read as history, sociology, psychology. But every discipline has its core value. And the core value of literature is moral.
Okay.
Matthew Arnold had said that literature addresses only one question,
Right.
and that is how to live.
Okay.
But he says how to live is a moral question. which gives you the sense of what is right and what is wrong.
Wrong.
So if you are not doing that, then literature teaching is going waste.
Doing with. So, well friends, with these words we conclude the today lecture, and we will tomorrow have more discussion on this English literature and different stages of English literature. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on your behalf I thank Dr. Bhim Singh Dahiya for giving such an insightful lecture on this very topic. Thank you very much.